Hi, my name is Erin, and I work for the Center for Independent Living in Central Florida. How has the ADA helped me? Well, my job allows me my headphones. They help quiet the surrounding noise so I can concentrate and not feel so overwhelmed. Thank you to the ADA.
Thanks to the ADA, I can work with some incredible individuals who have a disability but are being provided the accommodations they need to be successful in their position and make an impact in the Central Florida community, really advocating for individuals with disabilities to get their rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Hi, my name is Josue, and thanks to the ADA, I was able to find employment that accommodated my disabilities here at the Center for Independent Living.
Thanks to the ADA, our constituents have a bedrock of foundational civil rights to build from when advocating for them on issues like housing and employment. If it wasn't for the ADA, we would be building from scratch, and we wouldn't have some basic components that today are seen as normal, but in previous years was not always the case. It allows us to make sure that our kids who may have an intellectual disability or a physical disability have an equal chance to reach their fullest potential here in the Sunshine State.
Hi, my name is Victoria Wells, and I work at the Center for Independent Living. Thanks to the ADA, more citizens of the U.S. can participate in the community in beneficial ways. We are stronger together because of our differences, not in spite of them. And I'm grateful that the ADA made it just a little bit more possible for people with disabilities to be part of the equation.
My name is Brenda, and thanks to the ADA, I learned how to stand up what I believe in.
My name is Javier, and thanks to the ADA, I had to be sure to be very confident to do my job.
I'm Marlena, and thanks to the ADA, I've learned that I can have accommodations for my job in the workplace and at school.
Hi, my name is Shea Watkins. Thanks to the ADA for all the work we put through.
For the ADA, for my walker.
Hello, my name is Representative Rita Harris. I proudly serve beautiful House District 44 in South Orange County. And I want to say that I am grateful for the ADA because my daughter, who has OCD, was able to get accommodations from her college that really were really impactful in helping her finish. So I'm thankful for the ADA and I'm thankful for you.
Thank you for the ADA for equality.
So moving on, it's a pleasure to be here today and to serve as moderator for today's discussion. We're honored to be joined by my friends Rita, Anna, my new friend Hiram. So that is Rita Harris, House District 44. State Representative Anna V. Eskamani, House District 42. And respectively, Policy Fellow Hiram Helfman and Rita, State Representative, to skip that line, I'm sorry. We'll stick to this good now. Thank you all for taking the time to be here today and discuss the positive impacts the ADA has made and the challenges we are still facing and what is on the horizon for the future. So, our first question goes to Representative Eskamani. So, Representative Eskamani, how do you feel the Americans with Disabilities Act has positively impacted the lives of people with disabilities in our community?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. I'm so honored and humbled that I get to join space with my esteemed panelists and of course with all of you. And this is my district, so I first want to say that's amazing to have a marker in my district. I'm so excited. But also welcome to our district, which does encompass Winter Park, all the way up to Maitland and Eatonville, and then we go through the city of Orlando to Belle Isle, Pine Castle, Edgewood. So it's a very diverse district. And so to answer your question of just the positive impacts of the ADA, it's transformational policy. I mean, it is, and it's also, it laid the foundation for other types of non-discrimination protections in the future. So many of the protections we have today for people with disabilities and people who do not have disabilities, we can thank the ADA for. Even protections around pregnancy. not being discriminated for pregnancy in the workplace, that is born out of the ADA, pun included. And so, it's really important for us to recognize just the transformational work the ADA has had on other areas of discrimination, but to go back to the core of it, the notion that your needs will be met in places of employment ensures that you actually can be independent, right? And asking for those accommodations is not a burden, it is a responsibility of your employer. That's a game changer, right? Because prior to the ADA being signed into law, many employers had no desire to hire someone with disabilities because they assumed that making requirements to help ensure that they could fully contribute would be a burden to them, that it wouldn't be something they needed to do. Even something as simple as just access to a building, right, was something that a lot of businesses and even government entities never prioritized or thought it was worth the expense. But the ADA puts into place to say not only is this important, but it's required, honey. Like, you gotta do this because we need to make sure that every person, regardless of what they're born into, or maybe what happens later in life, that creates the need for protection under the ADA, that our employers and the public sector meets the foundational basic support of success. And that can also make a family's life much better, right? Because right now in Florida, we have a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to the people with disabilities. There have been just two recent court cases, actually, I'm sure we'll talk about later. One regarding independence or people with disabilities, because Florida has been unfortunately leaning on assisted living facilities, but we shouldn't be making those type of decisions for folks who, when supported, can be independent. But even just today, there was a headline around incontinence products, that Medicaid was not providing coverage in Florida to incontinence products, which is really important for people with disabilities. And now they have to. The federal court said you have to provide financial coverage for incontinence products under the ADA. So we are still going through court cases and policy changes because of the ADA, which is pretty remarkable. I can't think of any other policy that's had that type of ripple effect and that type of daily purpose like the ADA.
Thank you. Representative Ellis, same question.
Well, I don't know how much more I can add to that. That was really thorough. So the ADA was incredibly impactful because of the fact that it did, like you said, lay the foundation for so many other policies that would come after it. It opened up access to spaces, public spaces, that before people with disabilities were prevented from going into. It opened up access to my own personal story, opened up access for my daughter to go to college and seek education, which might not have been a path that she would have been able to travel along had it not been for the ADA. It also, I think, really, we can talk about, obviously the impacts of it in employment, in school, and, policy is really important. But I think it also raised a lot of awareness around people with disabilities, around disabilities that we don't always see. We don't always recognize right away. I think that we are in a space where we are right now, where we're talking about these sort of issues because of the ADA, because it opened up a conversation that was really needed. And obviously, there's still a lot more work that we need to do, but I'm grateful for the fact that at least these conversations are happening, and we're thinking of ways to take what the ADA started and build it and make it even more impactful, make it even stronger, so that in the future, generations that are going to come after us are going to have an even better time maybe having access to these things, especially employment.
So Hiram, as an advocate for disability inclusion and a person with a disability, how has the ADA possibly affected your life?
Yes, let's see here. Well, as a person with a disability, whether or not I choose to disclose it when it comes to employment, just like anybody else, I have to prove that I can fulfill jobs requirements with or without appropriate accommodations. And so, let's see here, like if I was to do like office work, one of the accommodations I've had in the past is, okay, I find it hard to multitask with answering phones and uploading and processing documentation at the same time. And so like my tasks would be divided up. Okay, like one part of the day I might focus on the phones, and then the other part I focus on uploading documentation. Yes.
All right, thank you. So, Representative Eskamani, in what way do you feel that ADA has improved accessibility and inclusivity in public spaces, transportation, and workplaces?
Well, I would argue that Florida has a lot of work to do in that regard. I mean, just as an example, like, you know, our team does a lot of activities in public spaces, and, you know, even during the holidays, we do caroling. So we go door to door, and we do holiday caroling. And some of the volunteers that joined us were folks that needed wheelchair accessibility. And we hit so many roadblocks, like literally roadblocks, because sidewalks were cracked. You know, the different types of pavement styles was very difficult for us to go over, where, you know, we intentionally chose routes that were easier for accessibility, but they tend to be longer routes. And of course, just the pedestrian safety alone is very concerning for someone who is walking, let alone someone who is needing assistance in moving through a busy intersection. So with that said, the requirements are there, but we also have to fight for the accountability, right? And Representative Harris mentioned just the awareness, and I would add to that, the stigma is being broken, right? Where it's okay to ask for the accommodation, like my panelist was just saying, right? It's okay to ask for that because it is your right. And so with that said, in the context of Florida, you know, first of all, we're not a state that's very friendly with public transportation in general. But I do think that there are elected leaders and organizations who are trying to make that better. And the heart of that conversation needs to be accessibility. We need to make sure that whatever investments we make in public transportation, and whether it's a Lynx bus system or Sunrail, hopefully something much more expensive, that it's going to be accessible to folks with every ability, and that is required by the ADA. So it's not an afterthought. It's foundational, and I think that makes a big difference, because you don't want to be in a situation where, you know, items have been purchased, construction has been finished, to only go back and say, oh, we didn't make this accessible, right? So the ADA requires you at the front end to ask these questions to make sure that the contractors you're working with are trained and licensed to do ADA compliance. You know, whether it's your architect or your designer or your civil engineer, the ADA ensures that for students studying these fields, that they're also learning how to make things more accessible via the ADA. So it's a really important question, because it's not just, you know, those who are directly impacted and them knowing they can ask for help, knowing that this is their right, but for those of us who want to be accomplices, who want to be allies, like, it also requires us to understand the law, so that not only can we help defend people in these situations where they are not being met with their accommodations, but that when we're embarking on infrastructure investments and projects, that we make sure the ADA and accessibility is a part of it. With that said, in the context of Florida, you know, we even have some older government buildings that don't have stalls that are accessible, that have stairs to their front doors, and don't have ramps, and don't have elevators sometimes. And so there's an assumption that things get, you know, grandfathered in, but that's not true. and so I think it's important for us to also, I'm a firm believer in calling people in before I call them out, right? So, because sometimes people, especially if they've never had someone come up to them and ask them these questions, they might not be aware. And you know, huge kudos to advocates who are actually testing facilities. Like, there are a community of people with disabilities that will test government websites, that will test government buildings, and, you know, try to play a part in just raising that awareness and accountability to give the whether it's a government agency or a government office an opportunity to correct and to make sure they are following the law. And if we didn't have the ADA, what would be your path to do that, right? You wouldn't have an opportunity to voice that concern and be taken seriously, because unfortunately prior to 1990, a lot of these concerns were brushed aside. They were just seen as being, burdensome, annoying, you're making a big deal out of nothing. I mean, these were very much pushed aside. And today, those concerns have to be taken seriously. And I think that's a powerful thing for every person to then truly be given the opportunity to become independent. I hear so many politicians talk about self-resiliency. They want every individual to be independent and resilient, but you can't accomplish that if you're not given an even playing field. And the point of the ADA is to create an even playing field so you have the opportunity to actually be independent.
Definitely. So, Representative Harris, in what ways do you feel that the ADA has improved accessibility and inclusivity of public spaces, transportation at all places?
I mean, I definitely believe that there's been an improvement since prior to 1990. I think public transportation is more accessible, and I know that there's a lot of work to do in Central Florida, but I mean, being from New York, I see the difference. I mean, I love my city; it's an amazing city, but it is not a very accessible city for people with disabilities. I mean, literally, you have to go somewhere just 3 or 4 stops away from where you really want to get off in order to find an elevator or a way to get up top. So, I feel like in some ways, I think being a newer city, we have that opportunity to build things before they're already built. Like you said, a lot of the older buildings need to be retrofitted, to be more accessible. But we have the opportunity to build new things that are more accessible. But I think it's really important to have people from the community involved in the decision making and how these are built, and it's really important to try to find construction companies or architects who are representations of the community, because they're going to be able to see with their lens that like this is something that needs to be done. This is not accessible in this way. This is not accessible in that way. When you have people who really are experiencing it firsthand, they're really able to help kind of prevent you from building something and then on the back end and then on the front end, it's not accessible. It's not as accessible as it can be. Like I said, I certainly see in the workplace as well, there has been a lot of, I'd say improvement when it comes to people with disabilities. But again, we're in a situation we have so far to go. And we were talking about that earlier, Chip, how, there are people who are overqualified for positions that are being put into entry-level positions. There has to be some movement in, I think, as my colleague mentioned, destigmatizing people with disabilities as not being capable of doing a job above what they're being asked to do. And they are incredibly capable. And they have skills that are incredible and should be put to use. And I think it goes to what was mentioned earlier about the world needing to adapt to people with disabilities, not the other way around. And finding what the strengths are and really allowing someone to shine and kind of grow into their space in the workplace and not just accommodating them. Accommodation is great, and we should always want that to show us ask for it, because as you said, it is our right. It is a right to ask for accommodations, but we should be more than just accommodated. We should be allowed to thrive and be a productive part of a company and our workspace, and our ideas should be taken into account. So I think there's a lot of improvement, but the ADA did a lot, and I'm really excited and proud and happy that it passed, and I see so much that has happened since then, but I see so much that we can do to make it better.
Can I add something else real quick, Chip? Just on the airlines component, we didn't talk about flight. I think airlines have a lot of work to do as well. And a few dynamics here, right? So first of all, when we talk about treating our workers well, and I will say that so many of our workers, even here in Orlando, that are providing the support and wheelchair assistance, they're severely underpaid. Most of them are also tipped workers, but they can't ask for tips. So what are we doing to support the workforce that's also helping to ensure that folks who need assistance getting to their flight are also treated well and paid well? But then there's been horror stories of airports transporting wheelchairs and like destroying wheelchairs because they treat them like, regular luggage and not like these very expensive and necessary tools of access for people. And so that's a big area of concern for me, is just the ability for people with disabilities to safely travel. And And also just the sensory environment of airports, right? Like what can we do to make sure that for our children, adults with different types of intellectual disabilities just can travel. And there's been a better effort to educate employees, whether you're at a theme park or an airport, of these types of needs. Because unfortunately, there are situations where, back to the stigma point, right? Where a lot of families are hesitant to travel with their loved ones who might have an intellectual disability, let alone go to something like a theme park for fear that they're not going to be able to really experience it in a healthy way, because the sensory and the noise and the sounds can maybe cause some sort of reaction, right? And what is more concerning for families is how will others treat that child or adult who's having a reaction. So again, it's so important for those of us that want to be allies to also educate ourselves, right? And also know, how do you manage conflict like that in a healthy and safe way? And we do have great resources in Central Florida, but for example, if I have a volunteer that is experiencing, some sort of reaction to heavy sensory overload, right? I'm not going to call law enforcement. I'm trained, and I train my volunteers how we can de-escalate, create a calming environment. But at the same time, here in Orlando, we've been piloting the alternative law enforcement, and it's a partnership with Aspire Health to help dispatch mental health providers, right? And so also for us to think about too, like, are we making the right decision to help in this situation to make sure we're de-escalating and not making it worse? And I think that, though the ADA, none of that's necessarily like explicitly required. I think it's also on this effort to go beyond accommodation, right? And what can we do to be better advocates to say, okay, like I've done my part to understand how to support individuals in these different unique situations, and now I'm going to act on what I know, right? And it's on us to also be informed so that we can be better support people in those types of situations.
Okay. So, the ADA has done so much with disabilities in the United States, but other countries do not have the same laws and regulations. Either. We have seen that other countries have been influenced by our passing of the ADA. Through your research, could you give us some specific examples of that?
Yes, one of them is in Dubai in 2006. I passed a federal law 29, which protects the rights of people with disabilities to education, jobs, rehabilitation, and so many other areas. And then in 2010, Kenya also passed a Persons with Disabilities Act, which protects people's rights to voting, like the assistance that they can receive at the polls, and also employment, and also provides like employment and educational rights and things about accommodation. And in 2016, India also passed an act that was very much like one in Kenya. Yes. And then, of course, in 2006, there was the Conventions on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which obligates the countries that signed it to cooperate, to improve conditions for people with disabilities, and to also improve, also make sure they have access to all areas of access, enjoyment to all areas of life, like employment, education, entertainment, the arts, culture, you name it.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with the passing of ADA, there are still challenges that individuals with disabilities face. Representative Eskamani, what ongoing challenges or barriers are you hearing from your constituents you saw, and what steps are being taken to address them? I know we've already answered a lot of this, but there's so much more.
There's so much more, Chip. I mean, first of all, just being, so yesterday, for example, I took a tour of Samaritan Resource Center, which is over in East Orange County. So it's outside of my district, but it's actually closer to where I grew up. I grew up on that side of town. And I've always wanted to connect with them and see how I can help. If those don't know, they're they're actually supported by Orange County, but they're a direct service organization for people that are housing insecure and low income and so forth. So they do a lot of direct support there. And then a gentleman that was on the phone, for hours at this point, trying to get some sort of update on his disability. And he is an individual that at this point in his life, like he has, he made a joke about how many body parts need to stop working for me to get disability, which is kind of a sad joke, right? But he was in a situation where he's just unable to work anymore. His knees are totally, they're not going to function in work environments. He has half a lung, and he was kind of describing his health challenges with me. And you still can't get benefits, right, to be able to survive, and just bare minimum financial support. And this is a very common theme among Floridians, where individuals that clearly they are living with a disability are unable to access benefits, whether it's at a federal level or state level. These systems are severely underfunded and overworked to the point where they don't function anymore. You're home for hours. If you do get something like SSI, it's not a lot of money. So we have many individuals who live with disabilities that live in our hotels and motels because they're unable to afford the ability to, pay first month's deposit and then get into an apartment. And of course, just the housing costs here in general are astronomical. Benefits don't change. And it's important to remember, if you're on a fixed income, then you're making a decision between housing or medication. And so these are decisions that many of our loved ones and many of our neighbors are having to make who live with disabilities or have children who live with disabilities. That's been another theme that we see in our office is, parents that have their children who are now adults who live with a disability and the financial struggles they face. I'm thinking about JJ, whom some folks might know JJ, but JJ is just graduated from Lyman High School, going to Seminole State College, I believe. And JJ is an amazing advocate for disability rights. He is wheelchair bound, and he also is not auditory. Well, he's auditory, but he can't speak, so he uses an iPad. He's so incredible. He uses his nose to tap letters and communicate to others. And so he's come to Tallahassee many times to advocate on the APD wait list. So that's a big issue in Florida. The Agency for Persons with Disabilities wait list has upwards of 22,000 people waiting for services. And unless you're in a situation of crisis, you're not really going to see your support. And of course, crisis, I would say, is very subjective, because in the context of JJ, if his mom, Allison, wakes up sick tomorrow and she's unable to take care of him, that's a crisis for that family. So they define crisis as you're almost homeless, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's just these extreme scenarios where it's like, we're trying to prevent from getting there, which is why we need those resources now, not later. And it wouldn't even be, out of Florida's state budget, it's not even a huge chunk of change to eliminate this wait list, but we just have not seen the leadership, the political will to do it. And unfortunately, there are people who die waiting for services on this wait list. And so those are a few systematic problems in the public sector. The private sector, I want to leave space for others, but Representative Harris already highlights some of this, and that is the challenge of employment opportunities that also create space for growth. Because for a lot of companies, and we're very grateful for the companies that are creating opportunities, but at the same time, what is the opportunity for growth? I think that working by the poolside to clean up towels is very noble, important work. But once you're doing that for a year, there should be promotion opportunities. And I think there's also an assumption, as Representative Harris was saying, is that someone with disabilities, doesn't want or need a promotion. That's not true, right? And to treat someone with disabilities as any other human should be paramount. And those type of promotional opportunities are very limited today, and that needs to change. And I heard a lot of concerns about sub-minimum wage, and I understand that a lot of nonprofits that provide that, that is their model, and that's how they sustain themselves. It is a role of the federal government to step up and help with those types of programs, because I do think that it's really unethical to pay someone a very low wage just because they have a disability. Their work is still very valued. And we should really revisit those types of policies. And if it's a nonprofit that can't afford to pay because that's their current, budget structure, what can we do to provide them with more funds to allocate those dollars towards wages? Because I do think that it's just not a sustainable model, especially if someone is in a low-income situation where they need this money, right? It's not. It's something that pays their bills as well with inflation. I mean, inflation is finally turning off a little bit, but costs are still very high in Florida. We have some of the worst inflation rates in the country, and we have to think about people on fixed incomes, and many of our families with disabilities or loved ones with disabilities are in those situations. And if they can't maintain independence, then we're not doing our job. And so we have to really revisit some of these systems and make them better.
All right, thank you. And I'll talk to you in a minute about when we're done about that, because actually, since the last time we talked, I had some thoughts about that.
Oh, okay.
Representative Harris.
Yeah.
How does our local government work to ensure that business and public institutions comply with the ADA's accessibility requirements?
So I think our local government is doing a fair job right now. There's always room for improvement. I think that they're doing they're providing, for instance, for transportation, making sure that their buses are called kneeling buses with the lower down so that people who are in wheelchair or some kind of ambulatory assistance are able to get on. And I think that they're working to make sure that their public buildings are accessible. I think there's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to people who have disabilities that aren't always obvious to the eye. I think that we need a lot more resources when it comes to people with intellectual disabilities. There's not enough of those. And we do know that people who often have these disabilities are often the people that are most likely to be housing insecure, because of the fact that, again, it goes into lack of, employment or employment that will actually pay the bills, and employment that you can actually survive on and thrive on. So I think there's a lot of work there that needs to be done. And I think, conversations like these and, Center for Independent Living certainly help push that along. And I think that, that's an opportunity. It's a challenge, but it's an opportunity to make a life better for other people. And so I would really like to, see that happen in the future, how Orange County can really kind of lean into how to make things better in general, not just when it comes to the physical accessibility of being able to get into a public space or get onto public transportation, but also be able to access resources that will help people be independent, because I think that's the word that we use a lot and where we are sitting right now. It really is allowing people to be as independent as they are able to be and allowing them to experience that. That's what people want, right? Like my daughter, that's all she wanted when she was younger. Am I going to be able to finish college? Am I going to be able to survive on my own? She wants to be independent, and so many people with disabilities, that's what they want. They want to be able to take care of themselves to the best of their ability. I think JT is a really good example of somebody who is so incredibly smart, so incredibly bright, and really gets treated as somebody who isn't. And he is. And it's so frustrating, I think, when we watch sometimes some other people kind of interact with him, and you're like, he's incredibly gifted. Don't treat him like that. He doesn't deserve it. He's a person, he's smart, and he has a lot of abilities, and he should be able to live up to each and every one of them.
Definitely. Thank you. Hiram, how do you feel we can improve access to assistive technologies and support services for people with disabilities?
Yes. Well, let's see here. That with internet access, that more people are trying to make businesses or trying to make their websites accessible for people with various sorts of disabilities, like visual impairments. And let's see here, and then also in the workforce, still somebody who has major visual impairments can still do word processing tasks by speech to text, using screen readers, and so So most of those are not expensive, and plus even many people without disabilities also use the speech to text features too. And so it's something that everybody should try to adopt.
Definitely. Yeah, no, I mean, most accommodations have a wide range of benefits.
Yes, when somebody needs something like a special braille keyboard or something like that, those things can be expensive, but I do know that there are many states that do provide like grants so that a business can recuperate the costs. Like if they have to spend like $2,000 or something on it.
Just gonna add to that too real quick. Something that each one of us can do, especially in government, is to add alt descriptions to our graphics.
Yes.
And so, there's a lot of great like flyers that get printed, right? But if you were just to upload this as a graphic, a screen reader really can't process it. Maybe there'll be artificial intelligence that can in a week, I don't know. but at this point, what I know our team tries really hard to do is that if we ever post something very text heavy, we will do the alt text. So some of the social media websites, you can actually add the alt text like to the image itself, or you can just add it as captions. And I think, I'm not sure what folks prefer, honestly, if you guys have thoughts on that, but I try to do both or one or the other at least. But, and also even just describing an image, even if it's not a text image. So, if I was to take a photo of us, I would say, 4 people sit together on a panel to discuss the ADA. They somehow all wore shades of blue. Wasn't coordinated as happened. But, you try to describe to your audience and to Hiram's point, it could be helpful for folks that don't necessarily use these programs, but they want to know the context too, right? So and actually captions, I find a lot of people ask for captions regardless of their disability. They just like to have captions. So some of those steps you take are making things better for everyone, and it just again speaks to how cool the ADA is. We were talking about steps that make everyone's life a little bit better and helps them connect at different levels.
So continuing, as Representative Eskamani, are there any measures being taken to enhance educational opportunities on employment aspects for people with disabilities?
Yeah, this is such a great question, and honestly one that we're in the middle of. So one of the biggest constituent issues that I've been receiving as we go back to school has been for our K-12 community going back to school and what services are available for them, and challenges in accessing financial support. So it's kind of wonky, but Florida has recently combined all of our voucher scholarship programs into one program, where it used to be separated for children with disabilities. And so we're having a lot of parents reach out to us because they're trying to get, for example, reimbursements for their child with autism. Maybe horse therapy has been a really good activity for your child. That's unique to every child, right? That's not necessarily something that every parent would need to support their child, but for a parent with child disabilities, it actually would be really transformational. There have been delays in getting reimbursed for that because the state's been asking for more receipts, more, a doctor's note, and it's kind of created these unnecessary hurdles that our families never had to go through before, because all the programs were combined. So the folks processing your scholarship are not necessarily educated in children with IED. A similar situation with one of my constituents. So his son has autism. His son is only 4 or 5 years old. Loves the trampoline. Trampoline has been his son's happy place and way to express himself. And their property insurance inspector came by and it's dropping them because they have a trampoline, even though it's for their child with disabilities. And I tried to explain it to the insurance company, no dice. We found out the insurance company is more expensive, but is going to be comfortable with the trampoline. But yeah, it's kind of like these random things, right, that you don't even really think about until you're in that situation. And that's been a very common pattern in the education space. UCF, I will say, in the last 10 years, I'm a UCF grad, so a little biased, but UCF has made a lot of great strides in providing opportunities and scholarships to students with disabilities. It's pretty, it's remarkable when you get to see students walk that commencement stage who have been able to really tap into these programs. And I think it's also really important for us to continue to ensure that our students with disabilities know that scholarships are available to them. Because again, we talk about stigma, we talk about stereotypes. I assume there's a lot of people out there who never thought JJ could go to college. And if JJ was born 30 plus years ago, maybe he never would have had a chance, right? So I also think it's a part of us redefining what does college bound look like for our kids, and really opening up those opportunities for students with any type of disability. And with that said, the financial resources are going to be paramount, because for, again, many of our families who have children with disabilities, they spend all their money and time on supporting their child with a disability. So we need to really wrap them around with social services and wrap them around with the type of care they need. Even caregiving is so important, right? Because if you have a child with disabilities, your ability to work is very limited. So what can we do to support caregivers and to be good neighbors with one another, right? And help families in that way too. And so, not everyone has that large village on standby. So we have to create that village. I think government plays a role, and schools play a role in being that village for families.
So Representative Harris, to your knowledge, are there any plans to update or extend ADA to address emerging needs and technologies for individuals with disabilities?
Yes, I think that's a really good question. And when I was reading about it, there is still a lot of lack of access on the internet. And I think there's a lot right now. The internet is still kind of a space that is like lacking of real kind of laws and regulation and oversight. And so I think, I think that we are seeing how technology can really be advantageous to everybody, and especially people with disabilities. But we're also seeing how there's no requirements when we're talking about having to add a caption or having to add alt text. There's no requirements right now for a lot of these social media companies to do that, to just make that part of the, the experience when you're on the platform. And so I think there's definitely space to require that these, these companies, that they do that they provide accommodations for people and allow people to, either it's just part of the platform or people can opt in to receive it. And so even if somebody is posting on the platform and they are not being good stewards and doing alt text or captions, those captions are already provided for people. I think there's definitely space to do that. And I would, be interested in seeing how it's done on a federal level, especially using some of the infrastructure money and to help give grants to smaller companies so that their technology is more accessible to everybody.
I can add to that a little bit too. I mean, something that a lot of governments experience is when they can't make something more available for someone who's visually impaired, for example, they just don't make it available at all. Or they require, you have to call to get it and stuff like that. And candidly, one of the reasons why is that they're trying to avoid litigation. Which I empathize with, but at the same time, that's not the solution, right? So I do think that the federal government, alongside state government, local government, should make more intentional investments in providing technologies that can make something that maybe, in its original form is not very user-friendly for someone who's visually impaired, but to, create the description around it, to create maybe an audio component for someone who's visually impaired to describe it. And I think, instead of just removing things because it's kind of too hard to do, we should really take up that challenge. But the reality is that we do need resources. We need dollars to do it. Many of our local governments are navigating budget woes just like anyone else, right? All their expenses have also gone up because of construction and supply chain issues. So I empathize with these issues, but I do think the next 5, 10 years, as technology evolves dramatically, we do have an opportunity to use that technology to make government websites much more accessible to people. So I'm committed to that. I'm very hopeful we'll see similar leadership in that regard as well.
All right. So now as we look forward into the future, Hiram, what additional legislative policy initiatives do you believe are necessary to further support and empower disabled people?
Yes, one of them would be hopefully for the for both U.S. Houses of Congress to back the Competitive Integrated Employment Act of 2023 to eliminate some minimum wage, but also to make sure that people with disabilities can get competitive employment opportunities with appropriate accommodations, even those who have very severe cognitive and developmental disabilities, and so that they can also work alongside peers without disabilities as well, like in a hospital setting. Yes, many of them can also do things like stock shelves and many other different things instead of being in a sheltered workshop where they don't gain any skills and they're just ripping off paper, or they're just putting something together, or they're just putting some few pieces together and then getting us like 50 cents a week or something.
All right. So, Representative Eskamani, how do you intend to collaborate with disability advocacy groups and disabled individuals, which are all voices of all in policy making and decision making process?
I love this question. So, as a reminder, right, as state representatives, we're technically in what's called part-time legislature. So we're only in Tallahassee, which is our state capital, for about 2 months of the year for session, and then we have committee weeks beforehand. We go back our first committee week in mid-September. So what does that mean for the work that we can do engaging with directly impacted people and bringing their voices to the state capitol? So first of all, it's really important for us to not assume that you know us and you reach out to us. We need to reach out to you. And one of my go-tos in the legislature is Disability Rights Florida. Whenever I have a bill that's in front of me, or maybe we're thinking about a bill. So for example, I filed legislation last session focused on elopement prevention. And this actually came from the Autism Society of Greater Orlando. One of their moms had experienced elopement on school campus with their child. And believe it or not, it's not required that schools create elopement plans for students who are at risk of elopement. And we're not talking about marriage elopement, by the way. We're talking about, a child wandering away and being attracted towards a body of water, being attracted to something that could really put them in harm's way. And tragically, we've had circumstances, whether it's in a school environment or just at a home environment, where a child has, run out of the house and a parent finds out way too late. And this mom in particular, she had a situation where her child eloped, and though he was found and safe, they never notified her. And she found out weeks later from a teacher, just kind of mentioned, very loosely, it's like, what, So we filed a bill to require that if a parent requests a elopement plan for their child is crafted, that there's a committee per each school that revisits elopement plans, and teachers are aware that the child is high risk and so forth. And as we were working on this policy, I reached out to Disabilities Rights Florida, because I really want to make sure that all of our allies, all of our stakeholders are aligned. Because there's always going to be verbiage that maybe we don't like, we want to change it. In this context, there was some concern about the law enforcement component, because again, not every law enforcement officer is trained to work with a child or adult with disabilities. And so it was a really great, example of co-governance, right? Where I'm not making assumptions about what the community needs. The community is coming to me, sharing their perspective, and then we're going to bring in more people in the fold to have this conversation. And that bill unfortunately not pass. It did pass its first committee unanimously. So we're going to not only file it again, we are having conversations with Republican colleagues on doing a larger package of similar policies focused on our children and adults with IDD. because we actually have 2 lawmakers right now in the legislature who have personally shared their stories of being parents of children with intellectual disabilities. And so with that said, I think it's really important for us to create those opportunities to connect and to be willing to connect with, in different ways. So whether it's Zoom meetings or whether it's in my Orlando office or my Tallahassee office, like it's our job to make sure we're accessible and that we're also creating environments for our community to know us and keep in touch with us. Because I will say, you're the expert, right? Like, yes, we know a lot, we read the law, we try to be the best advocates, but at the end of the day, if you're directly impacted, or you're a parent of someone who's directly impacted, or your partner is directly impacted, you're gonna be the best advocates, right? And so to also realize that you can talk to us, like we are human, and you gotta hold us accountable, right? You gotta hold us accountable. So that's at every level of government, because every level of government plays a different role, right? So, Rita Harris and I, if the ADA was here today, we're not the ones who voted on it. That's federal law, right? But with that said, I see Bill Cowles in the room. So when we have policies that impact our elections, right, and access to elections, we're voting on that. But I'm talking to Bill to make sure, like, hey, does this actually work? Is this good policy? And he's talking to his advocates, right? So it's that full circle to make sure that we're all aligned, communicating with one another, and not passing policy that's going to cause harm, right? Our goal is to always do no harm and make things better. And every level of government plays a role in that. So understanding those jurisdictions can also help you be a better advocate.
Yeah. With that said, reach out to the Orange County Disability Advisory Board too. Would I help you?
Yes.
We are the most local.
Plug.
So, all right. So let's have a similar question. What are you working on or plan to work on in the future to ensure the rights of individuals with disabilities on our world?
Yeah, so I mean, that's a little bit of what Eskamani said, just, being out there, being accessible, allowing people to come to us, understanding that just like any other community, the disability community is not a monolith. Each there are people there with very different issues from each other. And so hearing all the different issues and working your best to make sure that you're advocating for them, but also, we just had a conversation before this panel. I get 7 bill slots, and so just Rep. Eskamani, and I have a bill slot open. And so the first person I thought of reaching out to was Chip. He's got some really good ideas for training, VR training and things like that. To help people become more employable and help them become, not just employable, but be able to make more money while they're employed. And so, at either sponsoring or advocating bills that are going to help people with disabilities in the community to live more full, whole lives is really important. And I think it's something that I think there's a lot of desire on both sides, like you said, because it's not a partisan issue. People of all political stripes either know somebody or are themselves impacted by a disability. As I said, I'm a mama bear to my daughter. I'll advocate for her all day long, every day. She deserves to have every opportunity of having a great life like everybody else. So I'm going to do whatever I can in my power. And as Rep. Eskamani said, come to us. If you see something and you're like, that doesn't seem like Rep. Harris, or it doesn't seem like Rep. Eskamani, reach out to us. I'm always available to speak with you, always sit down and have a chat with you. I want to learn how to be the best advocate, because as I said, the best advocate is the person who is in dealing with the issue at hand, and you're going to always be able to have the best input for us and to explain to us why a bill is good or bad, or what you'd like to see different with it, how you'd like to see it, what you'd like to see added to it or taken away from it. We are here to serve you. We work for you, so we are more than happy to have you come to us and talk to us and let us know how you feel about things.
And I will say, personal experience, they are both very approachable. So bring your concerns to them, they will help you. All right. So that concludes our panel. So thank you, Representative Eskamani, Representative Harris. And now I'm going to have CIL Student Director Victoria Wells come and close out today's program.
Thank you. I know we're running a little late, but if I have 2 quick relative questions, raise your hand if you want to ask something. Yes.
So I'm Jason Shelfer for Living Lucky, and one of the questions I have is, how do we get a louder voice in the community to raise awareness? Because it sounds like we have 25% opportunity to have disability around us, if that's the population statistic of people with disabilities. And what I see is that the diversification of abilities or disabilities and the labeling of disabilities creates a spread in the naming of the disabilities, which creates a spreading of people coming together under one umbrella to raise that voice. Does that make sense? So we're not getting a unified voice of this is what we need, and then coming to an employer, because my wife was injured at 15, right, when this ADA came into effect. And one of the hardest things for her is when she was employed by a private employer, is taking almost 2 full days off to just get a new wheelchair. Right? Because it's go to the doctor, get your prescription, go to the therapist to get a prescription, go here, get another prescription, go listen to the insurance company tell you no, and then go redo that process 2 or 3 different times. So there's problems for everybody, but how do we raise that collective voice to say, let's be more friendly, like I hear you saying, and just raise the collective awareness, because everyone's going to experience at some point in their life. Because if we live long enough, we're all going to have some type of mobility, some type of experience in this realm.
Right, absolutely. I mean, I think that the Disability Advisory Board here in Orange County does do a really good job in trying to align different voices and different types of disabilities. But to your point of like a statewide voice, you know, I think there could be more alignment, right? I mean, Disability Rights Florida, as I mentioned earlier, is one of my go-tos because they are just, not only do they have an active presence in Tallahassee, but they kind of have their network into local communities. And there are also like, you know, state-funded association organizations as well. You have the ABLE Trust as well that provides a lot of funding support to organizations. But to your point, I think there definitely could be more alignment, and maybe it's, you know, I'm sure if you know, Chip, you have some thoughts on this too, there could be some sort of like, you know, statewide version of the advisory board, right? That is, you know, accountable to one another, that has a network of disability organizations. I think Disability Rights Florida has kind of served de facto that role. But what you're really hitting the nail on is storytelling. And storytelling is such a powerful component. I don't know if there's anyone actively collecting those stories, like a story bank, because we have to also get these stories in the press more, right? That's a part of it, is because we all, like, you know,
APD collects the stories.
APD collects the stories. Okay, what do they do with it?
They post them on their website.
Okay.
Which is not a very accessible website.
Right. So yeah, it sounds like there could be some areas of improvement here. Yeah, because it has to have that constant, you know, press mention, because then more people will agree and want to help.
Yeah, and I would say the FRC produced Florida Rehabilitation Council, they collect stories as well.
But
yes, I'm sorry, sometimes I'm Michael Adams, I'm past chair, current member. We're also looking for those kind of stories regarding employment issues people have. So just go to the FRC website, this is where you can put your information. And yeah, we want those stories as well.
Awesome, thank you. That's great.
Hi, good morning. My name is Imani Brooks. I am a mother of a child with a disability. He actually is in the video.
Aww.
And yes, and I have a question. I am new in this fight. I don't have any family members with disabilities, so this is very new for all of my family. We are creating the village around. So for me, it is very touching. But my question is, I hear us talking about employment, and I hear us talking about college. I'm hitting a lot of hurdles just to get into kindergarten.
Right.
So I want to know, it's great that we're starting to talk about that, but what routes or what plans do we have to just get the basic education? I'm running into either my child has to be in a center that doesn't have full curriculum of learning, or either I have to fight day to day to get accommodations at a regular school.
At public school. Yeah.
And I'm terrified of going to public school right now for him. So it's looking at private schools and now looking at scholarships, and I'm on my 3rd job. And United Way is great. I'm with United Way and they are very accommodating for my schedule, which is great. But I want to know from you guys, especially representative as a mother as well, what can we, and I am in the fight. I will go to Tallahassee, I will write a story, I will have him tell a story, I will whatever I need. But I want to know, before we even get to that place of college and employment, what steps can we take here for preschool and early education?
Do you want to?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's space, I think, there to, file legislation to open up doors so that there are opportunities for young people with disabilities to start out their educational career in a space where they have accessibility to the things that they need. I mean, you shouldn't be, having a difficult time trying to get unique from a public school, because in theory, they're supposed to be accessible to all. That's supposed to be the advantage of public schools, that they're supposed to be open to every student. And I know that states differ, unfortunately. That's, a situation that we're in where, we're in a state that perhaps maybe is not fulfilling that part of its promise. So there's definitely opportunities to advocate and file legislation to open up those doors, and finding a way to get it passed. It might not be something that happens overnight. You have to kind of work on that, but it's definitely something that I'm happy to work on. I think it's important. And I didn't put my daughter in public school because of her disability. And in some ways, I wonder if that held her back in some way, or if that was an advantage to her, because I found when we moved here to Florida that they didn't have the resources for her. It's not that they didn't want to, it's not that the teachers weren't great, it's not that the environment wasn't great. They just didn't have the resources to deal with the emotional things that she was dealing with at the time. And so I think there's definitely conversation needs to be had, and some work that needs to be done to get that done. Have to exchange information and see what we can do to make it happen.
Just to add to that too, so like our Paris was saying, public schools have federal requirements to meet the needs of your child. But the challenge we have is what are the resources for them to do that in a way that is going to actually meet the needs of that child, right? And are you Orange County?
I am.
Okay. So my first reaction was, I definitely wish you have my card too, because you want to have an advocate on your side, right? And so to have a lawmaker that is contacting the county and saying, hey, I have a constituent, I have a young child going into your schools, and want to make sure that you're going to support them, hear what their needs are. You are federally required to meet these needs, right? And there are a lot of great support spaces out there. And actually on August 22nd, here in Winter Park, we're hosting Education Town Hall. And one of our speakers will be Judy Hayes. And Judy is a mom of two boys. One of her sons has autism. And so she's really big on IEPs, right? Down syndrome, thank you. So she's really big on IEPs and making sure that the public schools are meeting the needs of her son. And so with that said, I'm pretty sure you have the information, because that might be a good forum. We're going to talk more about K-12 in that space. But it's really important to hold your public schools accountable. But to your point, and to Harris's point, if you just don't feel like the public school can meet the need, maybe it's classroom sizes, maybe it's the campus environment, especially if there's mobility challenges, maybe they don't have a playground. Like we have a school in College Park that the playground is accessible to students of different abilities. But not every school has that, right?
I always like to tell the story. My son, for a full year, had to sit on the side and watch other kids play.
Not okay. Yeah.
And when I found that out, that was when I started my journey. That is when I started the ADA. That is when I started really advocating. So I'm just grateful. I love this because I'm hearing that there's hope. In the future. I'm just wondering in this week right now.
Well, in Lake Silver Elementary School, which is the one in College Park, like the parents raise money to do that, right? Like that's what's so not okay, right? Is that that should be funded by the government, but no, parents have to raise money for those kind of things. But we'll talk offline and more on the August 2nd town hall too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I wish we could answer all the questions. Obviously, they're very reachable. So please reach out to us. You can email me, bwells at CIL Orlando. Call us, whatever you need. We are also, able to work with you, Eskamani, on helping resolve some of these issues. That's what we do. Okay, so I've already run over a little bit. I'll go through this kind of fast. As you can see, there's still much to celebrate. CIL has been an advocate for people with disabilities for over 47 years, now with a historical marker. So exciting. We have been breaking barriers for people with disabilities so they can live more accessible and independent lives. And we do ask today, as we're celebrating the 33rd anniversary of the passing of the ADA, that you join us in making a gift of $33 or more. On the sheets, you have a QR code you can scan, and the first thing that'll pop up when you scroll down is a little donation information. If not, there's a little crystal bowl on the table back there for cash or checks, whatever you prefer. And thank you to everyone that came today. Thank you to all of our allies, our partners. Thank you, TJ McCarthy, for helping us with all of this, putting together that video. I hope everyone was enriched, everyone learned something. One of the ways that we mobilize is we talk to our friends and families, we share, go follow us on social media right now. That's one of the ways that we get these stories out. I'm always sharing resources from Disability Rights Florida, love them, trying to connect you with what the resources are in the community. So yes, to the storytelling question, I wanted to plug that as well. Yes, that's it. If you want to take a pizza to go, a piece of watermelon, a drink, feel free. Thank you all so much.